Well, good day, everybody. My name is Jason Beck. I'm Manager of Community and Corporate Relations for Waypoints in Fort McMurray, and Waypoints is one of 8 CACs. You'll hear us using CAC and CYAC a lot today. CACs, Child Advocacy Centers, and CYACs, Child and Youth Advocacy Centers. And I'm joined by some guests today where our topic for this month of our CAC Connect is grooming. And so we have some wonderful folks who work in the field at various CACs in the province who are going to be helping us today. First of all, we have Kellie Cummings, who's with Central Alberta Child Advocacy Center in Red Deer. We have Corporal Michelle Mosher, RCMP member with Caribou CAC, Grande Prairie, and Dr. Sarah MacDonald from Calgary Area Child Advocacy Center. So welcome, everyone. Good to have you. First of all, if I could just get you kind of each to do a little introduction of yourselves and the work that you do in your respective centers, that would be great. So why don't we go with the order I just did? How about Kellie, why don't you just start us off?
Well, thank you for having me here. Yes, my name is Kellie. I work at the Central Alberta Child Advocacy Center here in Red Deer, and I'm the coordinator. I provide a lot of the support to the families, and I will meet with them when they come through the doors, and then also follow them all the way through to if there is an upcoming trial. And then I also do the informal supports for those kids that have experienced child abuse, sexual violence, that do not have the chargeable files as well.
I'm Corporal Michelle Mosher with the Caribou Child Advocacy Center in Grande Prairie, Alberta. And I've been in this role full-time for 2 years now, but previously to that, I was doing it off the side of my desk in another plainclothes role with the RCMP, so about 4 years total involving child abuse investigations.
Awesome.
Thanks, Jason. So I'm Sarah MacDonald, and I'm a forensic interview specialist here at the Calgary Area Child Advocacy Center. And so a big part of my job is conducting child forensic interviews of kids here in Calgary and also across southern Alberta. So that's what I spend a lot of my time doing. I also train police officers and other professionals in the criminal justice system around topics related to forensic interviewing, memory, among others. So thank you so much for having me here today.
Great, good to have you all, and great to have a cross gamut of experience here as well. I think this is going to be great for our discussion. Of course, we are all a part of 8 CACs in Alberta. We have the Calgary Area CAC, Caribou CYAC in Grande Prairie, Central Alberta CAC in Red Deer, Chinook Sexual Assault Support Center in Lethbridge, Little Bear CAC in Lloydminster, CARC, which is the Sexual Assault Response Committee in Medicine Hat, course, Waypoints here in Fort McMurray, and the Zebra Center in Edmonton. So without further ado, let's dive into our topic. Of course, we're going to have hopefully a very organic conversation about this today. A very difficult topic, obviously, but we're going to dive in and see where we end up today. So Michelle, I think I'll come to you first. Why don't you give us a definition for those who may not know what is grooming?
So child grooming is basically when a person tries to establish an emotional connection with a child or a youth in an effort to reduce their inhibitions, to potentially develop a sexual relationship with them.
Mm-hmm.
So last month we talked about luring, and so obviously in this age where we're in right now, where we're not as much in lockdown now as we were at that point when we did that episode, but definitely that there's a much larger online presence when it comes to luring. What about when it comes to grooming? And I guess maybe the difference between and the similarities between grooming and luring. Is this something that more happens in person grooming, or does it happen online as well? How about Sarah? Why don't you give us that quick answer?
Yeah, thank you, Jason. So excellent question. And grooming behavior can be carried out in any environment where children are present. So certainly that can be online. It can be at home. It can be at school, in sport, or some other kind of youth serving organization. And so certainly grooming, one of the main sort of behaviors that we see is the manipulation of the kids themselves. And another really big piece of that is the manipulation that we see for significant others. So parents, other significant trustworthy adults in the child's life, and also grooming of the environment. And we particularly see that really commonly in environments like sport, and in school as well. So certainly grooming can happen anywhere where children are present. And I would encourage you too, there's an excellent piece of literature that came out, I believe, about a year ago from the Canadian Centre for Child Protection. And they looked at, over a period of 20 years, cases of sexual offenses against children in school settings. And what they found was that over those 20 years, there were 750 cases against a minimum of 1,200 children that were carried out by 714 employees working in the school system. So certainly, I mean, grooming is one part of some cases of sexual abuse against children. And so there's some really great data out there to help us understand a bit better.
So let's go back for a second, because when it comes to grooming, obviously, it's over a period of time, and I'm assuming obviously that definitely it's the speed of trust. Basically, I'm assuming is how fast it goes. I mean, for some it could be a shorter period, for some it could maybe be a longer period.
So the literature doesn't really provide an average length of time for the grooming process, but it is fairly well established that typically it does take some time. And I think as we'll talk about more this afternoon, we'll learn that there are multiple stages of the process, and trust development is one of the most critical stages of the grooming process itself. And certainly that can take a period of time.
Well, that's a great segue. Why don't we talk about that? Why don't we talk about the stages of grooming? So basically, for lack of better words, the perpetrator's process. Kellie, would you have some thoughts on that you'd like to share with us of that process?
Yeah, that's a great intro into that. I like to utilize Dr. Michael Wellner's. He actually provides a lot of information, and it's really helpful to just have that basic understanding when we're learning, because it's just not natural for us as parents, right? So the 6 stages of child grooming, then the first stage is targeting the victim. The second stage is gaining the victim's trust. The third stage is feeling the need. The fourth stage is isolating the child. The fifth stage is sexualizing the relationship. And the sixth stage is maintaining control. So it does come into a great explanation with what I like to share with the 6 stages. So first, like the targeting of the victim. So there is a process that a groomer actually will identify some type of vulnerability that is actually within the intended victim. And children with the less involved parents seem to be actually one of the possibilities of target. Not saying that it is a universal approach. Like it is one of the things that is actually noticeable that the groomer may focus on. And so through that, they're able to start building that time and trust growth, right? And when they identify and target with the needs that they're able to grow off of. From usually after the targeting the victim, the groomer actually will then look into gaining the victim's trust. That is very, very important. And there is no time limit in regard to building that trust. It all depends on the individual and then also the groomer themselves as well. So from there, what I mean by gaining that victim's trust, the groomer usually gains the victim's trust by gathering the information. It's a very observation time. They're paying attention. Now you have to understand the groomer doesn't always think like you and I as well. So they pay more closer attention to details that we as parents or supports within the child's world will not pick up on. So for example, I would feel that I have a great connection, right? But my child may not feel that they have a great connection with me. And so the groomer could utilize that as a way of gaining trust, providing that support. Oh, I understand. It wasn't great for me when I was a child either with my parents, etc.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah. And then from there, there's usually like they have the feeling, the need. So once the groomer has figured out what the child's needs are, or interests, the voids, then they can grow from there. So they begin to fill the void. They may provide the small tokens of gifts or the small tokens of positive reinforcement. And that can be anything from material or actual, just that unconditional appearance of support. And then usually some of the small tokens of gifts usually start off small, what the child, teen, youth is interested in. And then it could be like the exploration of alcohol and drugs and stuff as, the relationship grows. And they seem to go in and out with a testing period as well, the groomer. So they kind of like do an example to see what the response is from the child or youth. And then they observe if it's a positive, like if their face lights up, or if they're leaning in and paying attention to whatever they're presenting as like a gift. And then they grow from there. So as that relationship builds, and like I said, they do those testing points, then they kind of start going in and out with a weaving of trying to isolate the child. So if the child or the teen youth is sharing with the person that is grooming them, a little bit of just breakdown in relationships, be it to parents, friends, grandparents, they kind of start from the outside, right? With the people of trust in their world that they're having difficulties with. So, if the child, teen, or youth is frustrated with a cousin or a friend, they'll start minimizing that support, right? And then it seems to grow, and Michelle and Sarah, please correct me if I'm wrong, it seems to grow as a testing and very methodical way to the important people within their family. So look at it as like an onion, right? So most important in people in the person, the child, youth, teens world is in the middle. And then there's layers of relationship access and trust and friendships, acquaintances, etc. So they'll start on the easier target, and then they'll work in. What the outcome that the groomer is actually wanting is like to encourage the child to sever any protective supports in their world. And again, I don't want people to always think it's family or the parent, because there are relationships in their world that is not consistent, that the child identifies as a protector.
Right.
So in every single stage or in any circumstance, it's not a universal approach. It's very individualized. So that's why it's been so important for us to know our kids. So this is where, that sometimes when the education and awareness regarding sexualizing the relationship becomes difficult for parents, teachers, and or others to have, right? Because the reality is, after that groomer has that child isolated, then they'll start the process of sexualizing the relationship. And so it can be little darts in and darts out. And if a child comes from a place that they don't understand their love accounts, because we're all born with love, right? A full heart. But as we grow, we kind of start learning our different love accounts. I love my parents differently than I love my best friend. And society has to develop that. It's not actually, we're not born with that. So we love easily, especially as children.
Mm-hmm.
And then of course, physically, we are all born sexualized. All of our erogenous zones are there. So that the groomer is able to go in and out. So this is like the tickling, etc. Many of us that have been in the field for a long time, you can tell who we are in the crowds, because once somebody starts tickling a child at an event, a lot of us are like paying attention, we're looking, right? Because that's a way that the groomer can start desensitizing the child or when they accidentally tickle the genitalia area, right? That's what they're saying in their, you know, they accidentally tickled the genitalia area. They're looking to see what the response is. So sexualizing the relationship, what I'm trying to say, can come in different forms. And again, they're always thinking differently than we are. It's also individualized when it comes to the children. And what they're really doing is establishing that strong emotional attachment, and they're trying to utilize that love and then also the physical feeling and grow from there. So, you know, the groomer is going to start progressively sexualizing many things and implementing it into their relationship. You know, at the end, the desensitization of the child may also occur through like the talking and then the exposure of pornography and then having sexual contact. So then the child may begin to see their relationship in more special terms, because like I had shared earlier about the love accounts, the difficulty understanding. I usually share that, you know, the process, like I said, is sometimes very methodical. And, you know, it is easy for us as adults to get really frustrated, anger, and just look at the top layer of the multifacets of the grooming process. But I'm going to tell you, it goes deep. And the relationship is special to a lot of these children, right? Because they don't have the abstract thinking.
Right.
So as much as we want to educate people that, you know, there is the trauma and the when we adultize it, you know, the horrific, all of those feelings, images, and awarenesses, we're still dealing with children with big loves. And that's why it's important to teach our children about different love accounts. And so from there, that's when the groomer will be able to maintain the control. Once the sexual abuse has begun, the child, you know, is now, some children and teens and youth, their identity is overtly, so through other people. So even though that they know their what's happening to them is abusive and they're experiencing sexual violence, in their head they're saying no, stop. But if they don't have that self-worth and that self-confidence, or, you know, I don't even want to use like kids don't always have to have self-worth and self-confidence to reach out. They do need somebody in their life that they actually feel connected to. And that's our responsibility as adults.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And so they have difficulties if they're unable to put even words to what's happening to them. So it's important for us to teach them their words as well, and understanding. And if you have a difficult time talking to your children, teens, or youth, it's so very important to have somebody that they trust and know to have that conversation, or utilize, you know, one of a counselor or family wellness worker to have that conversation with kids. So then, you know, once they have the maintaining of the control, the threats now can begin, and that is a mixed message to the children as well, because some of them think that they have this special relationship and now they're being threatened. You know, you can't say anything. If you say anything, I'm going to hurt your animal. If you do something, I'm going to, you know, if you tell a teacher, I'm going to start talking to your friend. Like they use a lot of threats as well to maintain that control.
I think, Kellie, it's so wonderful that you described all of the stages, and particularly the last couple, regarding, you know, securing secrecy of the child, because a lot of times when people in the public hear about grooming, they oftentimes think that it's just the beginning phases. So all the things that happen leading up to the sexual abuse of the child. But I think it's critically important that we keep up the conversations about the last stage of securing secrecy and making ourselves knowledgeable about the lengths that offenders can go to make sure that kids don't tell. And the reason I'm bringing that up is because there's such a commonly held myth that if kids are sexually abused, that they will tell right away, that they will come forward and they will make a report and they'll tell their story because presumably they would want it to stop. And so that's a myth that's held in the public, and it's something that we try really hard to educate people on, because child sexual abuse is a very complicated type of case, and grooming certainly is equally as complicated and very nuanced. And so that stage of maintaining secrecy and the threats that are involved can be very significant to that child. So thank you for touching on that.
Yeah, I want to go back to what you said, Kellie, as well, about them finding their voice and having somebody to tell. But the reality is, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but the reality is, from what you've described as the stages, by the time it gets to abuse, where touching starts to take place, which if a child automatically then knows, wait a minute, this is wrong, but already they've been groomed, already they've been isolated. So do they feel that they can even tell? Like, what's the likelihood that they do come forward and tell at that point? You know, and I guess, does that add to them feeling lost and trapped, I guess, for lack of better words?
My experience working with, from all ages, right? I have been very blessed to be able to work from the young age group to the old age group in many different walks of their healing paths. The consistency that, this is all from just working with people, is that it's an emotional roller coaster at times for them as well. Mm-hmm. Because they're being sexually abused, but they have this relationship that they value as well with this individual. And remember, they don't abstract think at a young age. They don't even have that developed in their brain. So it's difficult for them to overtly get the words out and tell somebody. And that's why we see them talking to their friends more. Mm-hmm. That they're usually disclosing to a friend first. Again, not the rule. It's just what has been shared with me over the years, that the first person, many of those that I've supported over the years, it was a friend that they actually disclosed to first. And what do friends ask of friends? Secrecy.
Mm-hmm. One thing I think that should be noted, though, is that, there's a lot of online grooming that's happening, and it doesn't take a long process for that to happen. It could happen like within 5 hours or 12 hours. And, considering COVID-19 this year and all the social distancing and how youth and children have been away from their friends and boyfriends or what they might want to have, all it takes is a click of a button, and within minutes they're connected to somebody who is grooming them right off the hop. So it doesn't necessarily always have a long process. It could just be depending on the child or the youth that they're talking to at the time and what's going on in their life and what they're seeking out at that time.
Right.
And not all grooming leads to contact offenses. A lot of it can be online luring, where there's images that are exchanged or images that are asked for, or any sort of sexual content that's part of the grooming process, right? If you've ever been on certain platforms like Kik or Omegle or Talk to Strangers, you'll see that grooming happens within seconds without even building a rapport. So that's something to mention, because this year especially, and that's why there's been such a spike in online luring. Like is because that's all taken out and kids are vulnerable and they want to have some sort of connection because they're not getting that within their peer groups either, right? So
Michelle, you're absolutely right. And online is kind of a special place because it's not difficult for people to find out information about kids. And when I say information, I'm talking about friends of theirs at school, the name of the school that they go to, the instrument that they play, the name of their horse. All of that information is sometimes easily accessible. And so if kids are presented a stranger on the internet who knows these details about them, we know that can really lead to a false sense of confidence, that the child sometimes thinks that that's, you know, a sense of security. They have this false sense of confidence that this is a safe sort of encounter. And again, those kinds of details are not hard for people to find out about. So you're absolutely right. It can happen quite quickly online. And so, I mean, at the end of the day, we really all have a truth bias. Even us as adults, we want to believe that people are telling us the truth. And so when we combine a truth bias with sophisticated grooming tactics or strategic grooming, and sometimes a high degree of vulnerability in these kiddos, then it's really not surprising that we can end up with a really unfortunate situation.
So I guess the next natural place for us to go then would be into the parent and caregivers world of obviously wanting to protect our children, but also at the same time, I mean, we live in a world where it's designed that we have adults that are in appropriate relationships with children as coaches, as some social group leader, or whatever the case may be. How do you balance, like, how do you recognize, how does a parent or caregiver recognize when grooming is happening, especially where it, by definition, is very covert and can be very subtle and can take a very long time to develop, and it's would probably appear for quite a while as a natural relationship. So maybe, Michelle, if you wouldn't mind, you know, maybe you can springboard us on this conversation of how does a parent or caregiver watch, what do you watch out for? What do you look for? What kind of conversations do you have with your children around this topic where it is so covert, I guess, for lack of a better word?
yeah, absolutely. You know what? It can be easy to detect for some kids, but other kids it's not. You know, in my experience, we've had people who've had great relationships, their parents have had great relationships with their children, and that you have told them, like, if there's anything that's going on, like, you know, you can tell me and I won't be mad or upset or anything like that. And that's, it can still happen in those homes. But then again, you can also have, you know, a child, and this can not necessarily mean that in grooming is happening, but, you know, very protective over their devices as anything. They could be on a game that you don't want them to be playing on. So, like, it can be hard, but you have to know your child. But even then again, you can know your child very, very well. And that's just kind of a taboo thing that they're doing, that they aren't really, like, giving you any signs.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not a parent, and so I don't know what that feels like, obviously, to be in that space. But I mean, I guess it's a delicate balance between, you know, wanting to give your child the freedom and not, you know, wrap them in bubble wrap, for lack of better words, but at the same time being protective over your child. Is there some resources maybe that you could share of, you know, ways to have these conversations with your children? I know when we did luring last time, we talked about the idea of there are no secrets in our families. There's no, obviously we talk about everything, that type of thing. Can we kind of put this in the context of grooming, of how do you watch out for, and how do you have these conversations with your children?
I would say too, for parents, you know, to trust your gut feeling. And, you know, you can have the most incredible relationship with your kiddo and have really open conversations, and you may trust them to come to you if there's something that's going on. And if you do observe things like, they're getting a lot of gifts from someone, if they're receiving rides that are maybe a bit confusing to you, if they're receiving special privileges, if they're being, like Michelle said, really protective over their relationship and their communication with that person, then trust your gut feeling, and you can ask your kids about those kinds of things too, and keep in mind that they might not understand that if something inappropriate is going on, they might not know that it's wrong. They might not know that it's inappropriate. And because the grooming process is so sophisticated, they might have been made to feel like they're a responsible participant in the process, when we all know that they're not. And so that's an important thing to consider too. So, when we talk about grooming in the forensic interview process, it's definitely something we want to learn more about. And we might ask kids questions about, was there ever a time where something happened that made you feel kind of confused? Did something ever happen that made you unsure of how to react? Those kinds of questions could be helpful for parents, especially if something's going on and the kiddo doesn't really understand that the behavior is inappropriate. It just kind of helps open that door to some conversation about what's happening for them.
Interesting. So what would you say then to a parent or caregiver who might be listening today and who does have that gut feeling, who does feel there's nothing specific at this point, but something is just not right here. I'm not comfortable with this. I'm not comfortable with this relationship. I'm not comfortable with this individual's connection with my child. What do they do with that information at that point? Like, what's your advice to parents?
I think it depends on the circumstances. If the adult that is causing you to be concerned is part of some kind of organization, like let's use sports as an example, I think that there should be a way to report that kind of behavior. And I know certainly in Alberta and other provinces, there's a lot of education out there to help keep kids safe. So there should be reporting avenues for parents if they're worried about their kids. So that's something that they could do if it's not quite meeting the threshold of being certain that something has happened, but they're worried about some inappropriate behavior.
So, well, let me ask you that question, because I know with child abuse, there's a very established protocol in place. There is a duty to report, even if you have a gut feeling that there's been child abuse. There's the duty to report it and allow the process to go through. But when it comes to grooming, so nothing has technically happened yet in the sense of any inappropriate touching or sharing of anything sexualized at that point. But there's obviously the gut feeling that something's not right. What can an individual, not just a parent or a caregiver, but I may be a leader of a youth group and might notice that one of my leaders, something's just not right going on there or whatever. What can we do? Like, can we, Michelle, can we report? And is there guidelines around reporting grooming from a policing perspective?
Well, if you are noticing that there is behavior that is concerning to you, and that's between yourself and a youth or a child, like, you can report it, because you don't know if that's been reported before in that same individual, and maybe the stage of the grooming hasn't got to that point with your own child, but maybe it already had with somebody else. So when the report is done, there could be connecting the dots behind the scenes from the policing perspective that could potentially protect your child from making sure that the stage hasn't ended where it is. And it could just be that last bit of information that we need to make an arrest.
So let's just say that it hasn't escalated to the point where there's anything chargeable. Is there still an investigation that would take place? What does that look like at the end of the day?
That's a good question. So depending on what the information that's provided to police is, it could just be a matter of doing an interview with the child, just likely to learn a little bit more, because there could be other ways of there's been communicating in different forms than what you've seen. And that's, if they do give that information, it could lead to more things. And if a suspect or a subject of the complaint is added to a file, like they should be contacted and made aware of that this is going on.
So you're saying that the individual who is the potential perpetrator would be contacted and made known that there has been a complaint made against them in this regards? Is that what
yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Yes.
So as a preventative measure, I assume then that would give that person an indicator if there is an inappropriateness coming, that they are grooming, that would kind of be an alarm bell to say, oh, I got to back off. So
absolutely.
So in that case, reporting gut feelings of grooming ultimately could help in the long run to not just help your child, but to help other children potentially.
And I would say more than just a gut feeling, like I would want to have like seen behavior or
Right.
some sort of messaging, or not just a gut feeling. I would want to have some like concrete information provided, right? Like,
Gotcha.
it's kind of if that makes sense.
Yeah, I just like to make one point around the significance of an adult's ability to groom the environment. And like I mentioned, significant people in the child's life. And so just keep that in mind. If you ever, as a parent, as a trusted adult, if you ever find yourself in the position where you happen to be the person that a child chooses to disclose something to, just keep in mind how you respond to that child, because in some cases, offenders will go to great lengths to groom the environment, meaning that they will portray themselves and do things so that they are perceived as a very trustworthy individual and a good person. So just keep that in mind. So if a kiddo tells you something, makes an allegation, and shares that with you, if you have doubts, if you have concerns, if you have any kind of disbelief, it's really important to put that aside and support the child who's come to you, because those feelings of disbelief could be as a result of that grooming process. And so that's just something to be mindful of, because that experience the child has disclosing for the first time to someone can really impact not only their mental health, but their decision to proceed further and participate throughout the process.
And also, just to add to that, it may prevent them from saying more and giving us more information. So if they make a disclosure to you and you kind of, oh my gosh, like I can't believe this, or kind of overreact, which, it is a concerning thing. But if the reason when we're doing our child forensic interviews, the reason why we make a disclosure, when a disclosure is made, and we don't react to that disclosure, because we want to ensure that they don't think that we're shocked by the information, because they'll be more likely to say more.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I definitely want to thank Kellie, Michelle, and Sarah for being here with us today. I really appreciate your insights and your thoughts. And of course, you can go on to the provincial website. We'll also provide all the links that were mentioned throughout this program today on this podcast as well. But the website is albertacacs.ca. And of course, October is Child Abuse Prevention Month. Our next topic is going to be sextortion. So looking forward to diving into that topic. And I say looking forward to, this stuff is awful to talk about, but it needs to be talked about. And so I really appreciate you guys jumping into the vulnerable spot with me today to talk about this topic that none of us like to talk about, but it's a reality and something we need to do to protect our children. And so for sure. So yeah, thank you so much. And look forward to seeing you guys again soon. Take care, everybody.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye-bye.